Have you ever noticed something strange? A woman who used to laugh with you suddenly becomes quiet. She still replies, she still looks at you, but somehow the energy has changed. Most men assume the worst. She lost interest. She found someone else. She's ignoring me. But psychology tells a very different story. Sometimes silence isn't rejection. Sometimes it's the loudest emotion a person can express. And today, you'll discover the 5 female psychology reasons why she suddenly becomes quiet around you. Because the 5th one is so subtle, most men completely misunderstand it and end up pushing her even farther away. Let's begin. Human emotions rarely speak in direct words, especially when feelings become complicated. Many women don't always express confusion, attraction, disappointment, or emotional conflict openly. Instead, their behavior changes. One of the biggest changes, they become quieter. That silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's a protective wall, sometimes it's emotional overload, sometimes it's hope, and sometimes it's a sign she's trying to understand what she's feeling before she says something she'll regret. The key is learning to read the psychology behind the silence instead of reacting to the silence itself. Let's look at the first reason. Reason 1, she's feeling more emotion than she expected. Imagine this. A woman enjoys talking with you. Everything feels easy. Then one day, she realizes your opinion actually matters to her. Suddenly, every conversation feels different. Psychologists call this emotional self-awareness. When feelings become stronger than expected, people often become more careful with what they say. Before, she spoke without thinking. Now, she thinks before every sentence, not because she's bored, because she suddenly cares. She starts wondering, what if I say something embarrassing? What if he misunderstands me? What if I reveal too much? Ironically, the more important someone becomes, the harder it can feel to speak naturally. Think about your own life. Have you ever become nervous around someone you secretly admired? Your words didn't disappear because you lacked interest. They disappeared because your emotions became louder than your confidence. The same psychological pattern can happen here. Her silence may simply be replacing the comfort she once felt. Reason 2, she's observing more than she's talking. Here's something many men overlook. Silence isn't always passive. Sometimes it's intentional observation. When attraction grows or when uncertainty appears, the brain naturally gathers more information before making emotional decisions. Instead of leading every conversation, she begins watching. She notices how you treat strangers, how patient you are, whether your actions match your words, whether you're consistent. Female psychology often places a strong focus on emotional safety. Words can impress, patterns create trust. So while you think, why isn't she talking as much? She may actually be learning more about you than ever before. Her attention shifts from conversation to observation. She's collecting evidence because trust isn't built by one exciting conversation. It's built through repeated behavior over time. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually paying the closest attention. Reason 3, she's emotionally protecting herself. Now let's explore something deeper. Not every silence is about attraction. Sometimes it's about protection. Imagine someone who has been disappointed before. Maybe they trusted too quickly. Maybe they opened up to the wrong person. Maybe they invested emotionally and got hurt. The brain remembers emotional pain surprisingly well. So when a new connection starts feeling meaningful, old defense mechanisms quietly return into. Instead of expressing everything, she slows down. She becomes quieter. Not because you caused the fear, but because her mind wants to avoid repeating old mistakes. Psychologists describe this as protective emotional regulation. People don't always build walls because someone is dangerous. Sometimes they build walls because they've been hurt before. If you react to her silence with pressure, she'll likely withdraw even more. But if you remain calm, consistent, and emotionally stable, her nervous system slowly learns that this connection is different. Safety isn't created through big speeches. It's created through predictable behavior. And that often speaks louder than words. Quick question. Have you ever mistaken someone's silence for rejection, only to realize later they were dealing with something completely different? If so, you're not alone. And here's the surprising part. The next 2 reasons explain why many strong emotional connections almost disappear, not because feelings are missing, but because both people misunderstand each other's behavior. Let's continue. Reason 4, she's testing emotional compatibility without realizing it. Most people think compatibility is discovered through talking, but psychology shows something interesting. It's also discovered through silence. Think about spending time with someone. If every quiet moment feels awkward, the relationship feels forced. But when 2 people can simply exist together without constantly filling every second, and the emotional connection often becomes stronger. As a relationship develops, Some women naturally become quieter because they're subconsciously asking themselves one question: how does this person make me feel when nothing exciting is happening? Anyone can be charming during exciting conversations, but everyday emotional comfort, that's different. She notices whether you become impatient, whether you panic, whether you demand constant attention, or whether you're emotionally relaxed. Here's the irony: many men become anxious the moment she grows quiet. They text more, talk more, explain more, seek reassurance. But that anxiety often creates the very emotional pressure she wasn't feeling before. Calmness is surprisingly attractive, not because it looks confident, but because it creates emotional stability. And emotional stability is something the human brain naturally trusts. Reason 5, she's fighting an internal emotional conversation. This final reason is the one most men never see, because it happens entirely inside her mind. Imagine standing between two emotions. One side says, I really like him. The other says, so, but what if I'm wrong? One side says, I should open up. The other whispers, what if I get hurt? This internal dialogue creates hesitation. And hesitation often looks exactly like silence. Psychologists understand that emotional decisions aren't made instantly. Different parts of the brain process excitement, caution, memory, and logic at the same time. When those systems disagree, people pause, they become quieter, not because they don't care, because they're trying to understand themselves. The biggest mistake you can make: assuming her silence gives you permission to create negative stories in your own head. Maybe she's thinking, maybe she's overwhelmed, maybe she's processing, maybe she's simply having a difficult week that has nothing to do with you. Emotionally mature people resist the urge to fill every unanswered question with fear. Instead, they stay curious, patient, present, because healthy relationships aren't built by perfect communication every single day. They're built by giving each other enough emotional space to be human. And sometimes, human emotions need silence before they can become words. Here's the bigger psychological picture. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication. Some people speak loudly because they're confident. Others speak loudly because they're nervous. Some people become quiet because they're losing interest. Others become quiet because their feelings have become too important to express casually. That's why context always matters more than assumptions. Ask yourself, is she still making eye contact? Does she still respond thoughtfully? Does she still make small efforts to stay connected? Does her behavior still show respect? If the answer is yes, then her silence may not be a closed door. It may simply be an emotional pause. Real emotional intelligence isn't about reading minds, it's about avoiding quick conclusions. The strongest connections aren't created by people who never experience confusion. They're created by people who handle confusion with patience instead of panic. Because trust grows in calm moments, not chaotic ones. And often, the person who remains emotionally steady becomes the safest person in the relationship. So, why does she suddenly become quiet around you? Because stronger emotions often create greater caution. Because observation sometimes replaces conversation. Because emotional wounds encourage self-protection. Because compatibility is tested in peaceful moments, not just exciting ones. And because inner emotional conflict can temporarily silence even the strongest feelings. Remember, silence isn't a language with only one meaning, it's a signal. Your job isn't to fear it, your job is to understand it. When you stop assuming and start observing, you'll notice details most people completely miss, and that's where emotional intelligence begins. If you found these psychological insights helpful, make sure to subscribe for more videos on female psychology, relationships, and human behavior. Which of these 5 reasons surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you know someone who always misunderstands silence in relationships, share this video with them. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest moments reveal the deepest emotions.